Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is artist Steve Rude. Steve, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thank you, Terrence.
Steve, you got your start in indie comics in the 80s, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you basically got your start and then moved on to the big two of Marvel and DC.
The time was the 1980s, which I remember very fondly, probably because it's a combination of being in my early to mid 20s, which is always kind of a time of exploration. And the place I was living was Madison, Wisconsin. So I was on campus and everything that happened in Madison was going to take place on campus. And I remember all the bands that came in there, the 80s bands. I mean, it seemed like everybody came there. A lot of the big bands and a lot of the lesser known bands that would come to the smaller clubs. As far as I know, all those clubs are gone nowadays. So I don't know what happened back then, but I remember, there's something about, I almost call it a kind of a thing in the air that takes place as the decade begins itself. I tend to see a lot of changes when the new decade comes about, the 1970, 1980, 1990. They tend to happen at the kind of the edge of the end of that decade and then on to the new one. And I think that's part of what I mean when I say something was in the air. There was a couple guys in Madison that were a comic distribution outfit. And these two guys decided, through other people kind of taking the lead, out of Illinois actually, that they would give this a shot. And I'm not exactly sure why they wanted to give this a shot, but they did. Probably had a lot to do with Mike Barron, because Mike Barron was, he's about 10 years older than I am, maybe. And he was kind of the one that was in a hurry to get notoriety in the field that he wanted to be in and the field that I wanted to be in. So me and Barron had met before the idea came for these two local distributors to maybe get into publishing. So Barron and I had met about a year before that on campus. I remember it was this beautiful sunny day in August, and we met on these steps of the Memorial Union, and it was very brief. I found out that Barron worked at an insurance company, and obviously didn't think that was going to be the final goal of his life. And I always wanted to be a comic book artist. That was my goal. But also I wanted to have the skills, if I could manage them and work hard enough, of an illustrator. And to me, an illustrator is somebody that rises to any occasion artistically and is able to pull it off. No matter what they give that person to as an assignment, they have to come through no matter what the subject matter is, no matter how unfamiliar they may be with a certain subject, they have to read about it and be able to do it. So I kind of thought of that as the highest calling you can have as an artist. But my first love was always comic books. I grew up with the Jack Kirby comics and mostly the Marvels. And I remember one embarrassing thing that happened later on when I was actually in the field. We were on this boat trip. The people from DC, Dick Giordano and Pat Bastian, took us on a cruise in the Chicago waters, and they asked me about what I grew up on. I said, I read Marvels. I said, DC comics were kind of for kids to me, and I didn't really I wasn't really into those very much. So that's the kind of dumb thing I say on occasion. When I'm asked, I don't know how else to be but except honest. But getting back to the coming about of Nexus and Capital Comics, it was just one of those things. They talk about it as timing or luck, but those two words are just words that people make up because we always have to have a word that describes a certain thing in life. But in fact, it's very intangible. Nobody really knows what luck is or why it may come about for some people and not others. I've known people in the field that have been working for 30 some years and they still haven't broke in at all. So I don't really quite know what the conditions are that make some people lucky and some people not.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about the various influences, and I think back to the Hernandez brothers, Love and Rockets, which has got sort of that underground vibe of the early 80s. And your work also has that kind of feel, but coming from a completely different place. So when you start working on Nexus, how do you sort of go from being the comic reader, the aspiring artist, to becoming the guy who can deliver those pages and hit that deadline?
Well, at first, I wasn't the guy that could deliver those pages and get it on deadline. I had a lot of time to, I guess you would call it, be in the embryonic stage where you would just kind of fought your way through things. I mean, the first thing that me and Baron did is something called the Encyclopedia Salesman. It was a story where a guy, after the world blew up, there was some guy that went out and tried to sell encyclopedias door to door. That took me like a year to do 24 pages. And that was drawing, lettering, and inking it. Later on, it was published by Pacific Comics. I don't know. I think you have to have some kind of a bursting sense of energy that makes you overcome the things that a lot of people are fearful of before they get into the business. Like I remember a guy from First Comics being told, I think one of the editors mentioned that he was paralyzed with hesitancy and fear about making deadlines. And so he didn't. And he kind of blew his chances for, getting more renown in the business. But he was a very good artist, but he just had that mental problem going on with the pressure, it's invented. It's, the whole thing is a mental thing, and it's always, it's not real, it's invented. So for whatever reason, and people had these various neuroses, something inside of them that blocks them. I didn't have that problem, thankfully. I was a maniac, I just got up every day and work.
Well, it just seems like it would be kind of tough because you talk about that sort of self-doubt or the inability to just put the pencil on the page. So if you're laying out a page and, it might not be exactly 100% the way that you want it, but the publisher's asking for it, how do you sort of make that decision to, sometimes say it can't be perfect, it's got to be good enough because I've got to move on to the next part of this project?
Well, in fact, apparently I'm someone that doesn't behave by the normal rules of society, and to me, everything I did was perfect. I mean, it was as good as I could ever make it. And when I would hear all these stories about people saying, well, I did the best I could under the deadlines. I don't know why, but I just kind of bypassed that problem, not really knowing how I did it, but I was just never going to let anything out that would embarrass me or not work up to my standards. And I think that's kind of the way I thought about it, Terrence. You work up to these standards you have at the moment. The standards may change a year from then. But for right now, when you're doing those pages in the here and now, don't embarrass yourself. That's kind of the way I thought about it. Get it done right, as good as you can. Feel good about it. And then take that feeling of having accomplished something without compromise, and you just go into the next book and the next book with a feeling of accomplishment, and you beat the odds. It's kind of how I think about it.
Now, you are one of those artists who seems to capture the essence of your influences. You mentioned Jack Kirby, and I think back to that Hulk Superman crossover that you worked on, where you had a very Kirby-esque kind of Hulk. You had sort of that DC feel to your Superman, and I think back to some of the work that you've done. I believe it was a cover you did for Marvel with Spider-Man and Mary Jane that really had that Romita Sr. look to it. So when you're working and you have these influences, how much of it is a conscious effort to maybe steer and push it in that direction? And how much of it is, this is just the way it comes out because this is the way I've been influenced?
When I get an assignment, like say that's reflective of a Kirby type character, all I can think of in my head is what I remember from those books. So from there, I think I kind of imprint myself on the assignment. If it's like, for example, you brought up the DC Superman in the Marvel Hulk. Well, the Marvel Hulk is Kirby to me. So if he doesn't resemble that version, it's not the Hulk to me. So I very much kind of imprint in my head on what it has to look like for me to feel satisfied with the way the art's going to turn out. Now the Superman, that came from the original source. For me, it's either the Schuster version or the Fleischer cartoons. That's Superman to me. And I remember when I was doing the World's Finest, I was given an unending amount of grief from Dick Giordano and Rich Bruning, who was the editor. He was the original editor at Capitol Comics, about this version of Superman that I did. And I never quite understood that to this day. Like, what is it, 25 years later? I still don't understand it. But they gave me all this garbage about the look of this original Superman. Everyone does their take on him. And I was trying to bring them back to the original version, and somehow, I don't know, it seems to be a pattern in my life. The more I insist on doing a certain version, which it's not real to me unless I kind of imprint that version that I've always known in my head, they give me a hard time with that, and I don't really know why that is.
It seems as if an artist can get away with taking liberties with, let's say, Batman's cowl and how tall the ears are. But Superman, I know Jose Luis Garcia Lopez always would talk about Superman, how he didn't like to draw him because they gave him grief about the curl of his hair. So it seems Superman has that special place at DC Comics, but going back to a Fleischer or a Schuster look that's like going back to your roots.
I've never had a fan question the decisions I made about the look of those characters, only the editors. Which, use that way what you will. I also remember in World's Finest, I brought the original Batman back, the original version, and they just outright vetoed that. I said, "What are you talking about? This is the way he looked. What exactly do you have against this look right here?" And I still don't understand it. These were the editors of the books that were calling me on these weird ideas here. And Giordano himself, who's been at DC for so long, looked at my Superman and said, that's just not Superman to me. I guess they wanted a Kurt Swan or a Neil Adams kind of version, but the idea of making him look like he did in the original version in the Fleischer cartoons was applauded by everyone except the editors. Go figure, huh?
Well, I was one of those folks buying the books and reading them and really enjoying them. Like I say, you had that ability to sort of capture an artist and spin him your own way. But you've worked with a number of writers, some on multiple projects. So when you work with a writer, are you working with them during the conception of the project? Is it something where they've got the script and sort of hand it off to you? Or do you have that input where maybe he's going to play into your strengths and the two of you together come up with a better piece than, individuals?
I've seen part about that, Terrence, is given the creative conditions that come about in the fact that every book is unique, the person that I'm working with, there always tends to be a kind of a modulation of the standard procedure that we normally go through. Normally, when somebody is doing a comic book, they get a script, and they just get a script that's handed to them, and they're expected to turn it into 24 pages or whatever. In the case of Mike Barron, we were in the same town, so he would drive over in his motorcycle to downtown Campus Madison, drop his script off, which was actually not a script, but it was a series of drawings that he would balloon dialogue. And he would sit down on the couch. I would sit down next to him, and I'd go over the whole thing. And I remember just laughing a lot because the stories were so fun. And I always got whatever I felt about the story that I was looking at, he was right there to answer any questions that I may have had. I normally had a couple questions to throw out at him and say, "You sure about this? Why is this guy in here? Or do I need to do this or that? Or what do you see me doing here?" And things like that. And but in the case of other books, it was the rare case that I ever got a script that I didn't want to have some input in. There were some cases where writers would hand something in and I would say, are you sure about this? Really, I don't think it's working like that. So of course they would get mad at me. Later on, when I got certain scripts, kind of funny thing took over. And I guess it's just the spirit of what I am. My job and what I was, I don't think of it as a job. I shouldn't say that. I think of it as, I don't know, make up a word that I haven't thought up yet, but it's I just think of it as my life. Storytelling is my life. and the drawing is my life. So when I get that script, I have to turn it into something that I kind of sign off on before I sign my name to these things. So I remember several times, like one example was What Price Glory with Captain America. I was working with Bruce Jones. Bruce Jones is a really nice guy. But I remember April Campbell, his wife, said, you know, it would have been good if you stuck to the script, Steve. To me, all I did was make it better. And from there, it's just a matter of you're talking to a different person with a different mind and a different set of standards and a different way of looking at the world. I was just doing what I had to do to make this really cool looking and make it a story that made complete sense visually. I've always been kind of big on take the words away. What are you looking at? Do you get it? Do you want to turn the page, even though you can't read what was written there? So that's kind of how I approach everything that I do. It's got to stand on its own. That's why the thumbnail stage is critical. Everything is based on those thumbnails, Terrence, as to how I approach something. And if it's not right, I just change the panel or the whatever. You know, there's always a little bell that goes off in my head if something's just not right. And when that bell goes off, it just means push harder, dig deeper, and try to find what it is. And for 35 going on 40 years now, I've always found a way to pull it off. But you know, they say, you know, you've heard that thing that when people get older, they get a little more cranky and persnickety and things like that. Well, I can attest that's kind of what's happening to me. And yet, one of the last things I did for DC was the Birdman series. And I don't recall the writer's name, but that story was flawless. I couldn't believe how good this thing was. So maybe it's not me being picky. Maybe it's just me waiting for something that is solid, panel to panel, page by page, throughout the entire thing. And that's, in the case of the Birdman story, that's what it was. It was impeccable.
Now, you mentioned the thumbnail stage, and I know some artists will work on a thumbnail. It'll just be like the comic book size, and then they kind of blow it up to start their layouts. Are you doing the thumbnail smaller? And if so, how do you kind of capture the same energy in the rough sketch on the page?
The thumbnails are about this big.
Wow.
And I learned a long time ago from art training in college that you don't need to go any bigger than this. And this applies to everything that I do, whether it's a comic book page, whether it's a painting, a full-blown 20 by 30 painting or whatever. This is the size that I work. And I learned very quickly that if you can read it, if the impact is there and the size is small, chances are when you blow it up, it's going to have the same kind of impact. But and also it's very fast to do things this small right there. But all the storytelling is worked out in something like this. And I don't proceed, normally I don't proceed until this stuff is all worked out. Now lately I've been getting a little sloppy, and I kind of catch it on demand at some point if it's not right when I'm drawing the actual page. So I'm starting to get a little lazy about making everything just right before I proceed. It's like throwing yourself in the deep end these days and seeing if you can swim. So I'm kind of doing that to myself these days. Who knows why?
Well, I guess at some point it's a challenge to yourself and your skills to just see how much you can kind of push yourself to maybe try something that you haven't had to do before, just to see if you can do it. So you're talking about these thumbnails. I mean, that's a very small size. So when you're doing something like that, it makes perfect sense that you'd be able to kind of look at it and tell the flow of the story. Do you ever have to modify it? Maybe there's, like in the old days, there'd be an ad that might appear in one spot, or is that kind of page turn always consistent?
You know, I haven't seen ads in comic books in a long time. I know they're still in there, but in the case of Nexus, you know, in First Comics, we had them. But at some point, you know, I basically ignore the whole ad part of it. I don't concern myself with, you know, the Twinkie ads that are going to be there somewhere, or another page advertising the upcoming books for Dark Horse, things like that. And I also don't think about things in terms of opening the book up in 2 pages. Like, I don't care how they flow from one page to the other if you're opening the book like this. I just trust myself to make sure that whatever's on that page works, and it kicks in all the right places to keep people galvanized, interested, whatever word you want to use. Never bore the reader. That's always in my mind. And if I bore them, it's my fault, not theirs. But when you grow up on Jack Kirby, it's kind of hard to bore the reader. Everyone's got these kind of things in their head as far as what's really important to them. For me, that's kind of how I think about it. Never bore somebody. Make sure you deliver everything conceivable that the page needs to make sure people never tune out. That's the only cardinal sin I can think of as an artist. Never bore them.
I wanted to talk about covers because covers are, I guess, that thing that sells the book, but they also have to tell a bit of a story. So as someone who does a lot of sequential work and also does a lot of cover work, how do you sort of make the right image so that way it's, I guess, reflective of the story, although a lot of covers aren't these days, but also that you as an artist can, really express yourself because it's not as expressive as, let's say, a sequential page?
Well, that's kind of where my illustrator training comes in, Darren. I just, I was bred into this field, and it just came as a natural gift or aptitude that some people have. I was lucky enough to have that. And because it's my calling and it's my aptitude, I love pushing myself as far as it can go. And as far as telling the story in a cover, the cover is just my attempt at trying to mirror the covers of the old women's magazines from the 40s and 50s. It's got to be something that compels you enough just to look at it as a cool image on its own. Never mind the inside of the book. If the cover is working, you've accomplished step one, and that is you grab their attention with a cover, and then from there you have to deliver Jack Kirby type visuals, or not. Of course, Kirby could do anything. People think of him as this blast in your face kind of guy, but the guy could do anything. He could have people sit around on the couch or the dining room table and make it exciting. So that to me is kind of always been in the back of my mind, is how you have to deliver. But yeah, the cover, I used to buy the comics based on their cover when I was a kid. Just the cover alone. I had this weird thing in my head, the cover has to count. And later on that would change over the years, because sometimes the interior artist wouldn't even do the covers. And now they've been doing this, what do they call them? Alternative covers. What do they call those things nowadays?
The variant covers.
Yeah, the variant covers. Yeah, everyone's doing that now. I don't know when that trend is going to stop, but I guess if it's selling, it's not broken, why try to fix it? Did I answer the question at all? With the covers?
It did. And you mentioned Kirby, and I'm thinking back to the fact that you look at some early Fantastic Four stuff, and then you see what Kirby does later on when he, I guess, hits the midway point of his run, where he's got Reed Richards in the negative zone, and it's this wild psychedelic pattern and everything. So it seemed like Jack was just always thinking and trying to do a little bit more. And I see, again, we're close to wrapping up. We have about 3 minutes in our conversation. But if we're talking about modern technology, is this something that you are dabbling in, the Cintiqs and the different software to work on the comics, or are you still pencil, board, and brush?
It's pencil, board, and brush. The only two people I know that are still Luddites about that stuff are me and Alex Ross. We get on the phone occasion, and I don't know. Just because it's there, why do I have to engage in it? There's a lot of people that look at that as, well, if I don't have it, I'm not going to get work. I honestly don't care if I get work. My life is Nexus, and that's always self-generated. To me, the only thing is I need to stay true to my roots in my conscience, and there's nothing in there that says I have to go buy a Cintiq, and that's not going to change. I'm very comfortable the way I am, and as long as I can get away with it, these old-fashioned tools, which I love and adore, I'm fine with it. I want to be part of that tradition that came long before me, and that's always paper, brush, and pen. And I'm going to stick with it. Sorry, guys.
Well, Steve, they are telling us that we are just about out of time. I wanted to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with me today.
Terrence, it's been fun. Thank you. I wish we had another 2 hours. Then we could really get stuff, and I'd start to finally, the words would flow a little better instead of being so stilted at times. But I don't know, I'm still not used to the interview thing. You know what I mean? I mean, we sit here and work alone all day, every day. I'm 7 days a week now. I work harder than ever. And the years go by. Now it's decades. It's a life process. that fascinates me. You have a lot of time to think when you're at the board.
It's true. Well, Steve, I want to say thank you again. I'd like to thank everyone at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon. Comic Culture is a production of the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke.